There is a moment every few years when the British royal family stops being background noise and becomes the only conversation anyone is having, when the checkout queue becomes a debate forum, when the group chat lights up at midnight, when newspapers that normally lead with economics and geopolitics splash royal stories across their front pages for days on end, and their editors feel completely justified in doing so because the numbers tell them that everyone, without exception, is clicking. We are inside one of those moments right now. In June 2026, the British royal family is the biggest story on Earth, not for one reason, but for a cascade of them, arriving so rapidly and from so many different directions that keeping track requires a kind of daily attention that most people did not expect to be giving to a 1,000-year-old institution in the middle of a year that also contains a World Cup, a prime ministerial resignation, a Middle Eastern conflict, and an artificial intelligence revolution. And yet, here we are, talking about the royals again, still, more than ever. To understand why, you have to start with the thing that broke everything open and that keeps generating new material every single week: the Epstein files. The decision by the United States Department of Justice to release millions of pages of documents from its investigation into Jeffrey Epstein has been running since 2025 and shows no sign of being exhausted. Each new batch carries the possibility of something that changes the story. And for Britain, the central figure in that story is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly His Royal Highness the Prince Andrew, Duke of York, second son of the late Queen Elizabeth II, arrested on his 66th birthday in February 2026 on suspicion of misconduct in public office, released under investigation, stripped of his titles, evicted from his royal home, and now suspended in a legal limbo that could last years. The investigation is ongoing, the documents keep arriving, and the questions about what he did and what the institution knew and why it took so long for anyone to act are not going away. But the Epstein story, as vast and as damaging as it is only one thread in a tapestry that is currently so packed with color and incident and human drama that it would be almost impossible to invent. Consider what has happened in the 5 days leading up to this particular Thursday in June 2026. On the 20th of June, Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles III would become the first British monarch in modern history to reveal his personal tax bill. The announcement, reported first by the BBC, stated that his tax payments for the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year would be included as a new item in the annual Sovereign Grant Financial Report, scheduled for release on the 25th of June. The Duchy of Lancaster, Charles's private estate, generated more than £24 million in profit in the previous year. His taxes on that income, on his personal investments, and on his privately owned estates at Sandringham and Balmoral would all be made public. Buckingham Palace's statement said the measure was intended to enhance transparency and broaden public understanding of the royal family's responsibilities, and added, with a directness that acknowledged the context without explicitly naming it, that the family continued to modernize and evolve. The announcement was remarkable for several reasons. The first is the obvious one. No British monarch had ever done this. The financial arrangements of the royal family have historically been among the most opaque of any institution in public life, shielded from the kind of scrutiny that every other publicly funded body accepts as the price of public money. The decision to open the books on Charles's personal tax situation is not just a financial disclosure, it is a statement about what kind of institution the monarchy needs to become in order to survive the specific pressures of this specific moment. And those pressures have a specific name: Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The decision to publish the tax bill was driven, according to multiple analyses, by months of embarrassing headlines about the former Prince Andrew, by public and parliamentary demands for greater accountability following the revelations about his finances, his lifestyle, and the investigation into his conduct. The tax disclosure is the monarchy saying, in the most concrete financial terms available, that the era of unquestioned opacity is over. Also on the 25th of June, a day that was already packed with royal news, Buckingham Palace suspended the changing of the guard ceremony due to emergency heat warnings issued by the Met Office. Temperatures in London were forecast to reach 40 degrees Celsius, the hottest June day ever recorded in Britain, and the decision to halt a ceremony that has been performed continuously for centuries, standing it down not for war or pestilence, but for heat, was itself a story about climate, about the physical vulnerability of traditions built for a different world, about a country and an institution trying to adapt to conditions that nobody designed them for. The king had already been photographed during a St. James's Palace reception being fanned by a top aide as he battled the extraordinary heat. The image circulated widely, a monarch being fanned in the British summer. Another visual that said something, without needing any words, about the times we are living in. A week before, something happened that generated its own wave of conversation. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced they would be bringing their two children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, to the United Kingdom in July for the Invictus Games promotional events, marking 1 year to go until the 2027 Games in Birmingham. The announcement was the kind that detonates in the royal media ecosystem and keeps sending out shockwaves for days because it carried within it so many questions that nobody could yet answer. Would Archie and Lilibet meet their grandfather, King Charles, who had not seen them in any meaningful way since the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in June 2022, when Lilibet was barely 1 year old? The answer, according to multiple credible sources, appeared to be yes. Charles had reportedly offered the family security and a royal residence to stay in during their time in the UK. A meeting between grandfather and grandchildren was apparently in the pipeline. For a king who is 77 years old and fighting cancer, the prospect of seeing Archie, now 7, and Lilibet, now 5, for the first time in 4 years, carries a weight that goes beyond family sentiment into something that touches the most fundamental human question about time and what you choose to do with what remains of it. But the question that was generating the most heated debate, the one that had the chat shows and the social media threads and the newspaper comment sections running at full capacity, was a different one. Would Archie and Lilibet meet their cousins, George, Charlotte, and Louis, first cousins who have, by every credible account, never met each other in any meaningful way? Archie is 7, Lilibet is 5, George is 12. Charlotte is 11, Louis is 8, 5 children who share a grandmother, who share a bloodline, who share the particular distinction of being born into the most famous family on earth, and who are, at this particular moment in their lives, strangers to each other. The Royal Observer published a detailed analysis on the 24th of June, the day before we are speaking, examining why the cousin reunion looked unlikely even during Harry and Meghan's July visit. Royal expert Amanda Matta told Page 6 that even if relations were gradually improving, the Wales household likely had a full schedule in place for the summer, and that any reunion involving the cousins would require tons of planning and goodwill from all parties involved. Matta identified the tension between their parents as the biggest hurdle, particularly, she noted, if Catherine were to be involved in any potential plans. Royal editor Emily Nash agreed, saying it was far too soon to predict the cousins meeting each other. They will be in the same country. They may not be in the same room. Meanwhile, and this is the kind of detail that makes the royal conversation so relentlessly rich in 2026, Prince George is going to Eton. The announcement that the 12-year-old heir to the Prince of Wales would attend Eton College in Berkshire that September, following in the footsteps of his father and his uncle Harry, was confirmed in the final week of June. Eton is expected to cost more than $400,000 in total across his years there. It is one of the most famous schools in the world, the school of prime ministers and poets and eccentric aristocrats, a school that sits 3 miles from Windsor Castle and that has educated the ruling class of Britain for 600 years. For George, it means leaving the comfortable domesticity of Lambrook School in Berkshire, where he and Charlotte and Lewis have been educated since 2022, and entering something significantly larger, more public, and more consequential. It means, in practical terms, that the next stage of his preparation to be king is underway, that the boy who stood at the Festival of Remembrance and at Trooping the Colour with his parents, already carrying himself with a composure beyond his years, is moving into the phase of his education where the weight of what he will one day be starts to be felt in earnest. His sister Charlotte generated her own headlines at Trooping the Colour 2026 in the second week of June, which is the kind of sentence that, parsed carefully, tells you something important about where we are. A 10-year-old girl generated significant international news coverage by being photographed at a military parade. She was described by Hello magazine's royal coverage as poised, with one commentator calling her the real boss of the family. People across the world watched photographs of Charlotte standing on the Buckingham Palace balcony, composed and precise and carrying herself with an ease that suggested she had been doing this all her life, which in a meaningful sense she has. She is 10 years old, and she is already a public figure in a way that most adults never become, and the world is paying attention to her in ways that will only intensify as she gets older. King Charles, at Trooping the Colour on June 13th, had delivered one of the year's more memorable royal images. He arrived at the ceremony as he always does, in military uniform, on horseback in previous years, in a carriage more recently as his health has made riding less practical. He saluted the troops. He accepted the celebration of his official birthday, a birthday that always falls in June regardless of when he was actually born, which is in November. He did it with the particular quality that those who watch him closely have noted throughout his reign, which is a kind of determined showing up that goes beyond duty into something that looks almost defiant. This is a man who has cancer, who is 77 years old, who is managing the arrest of his brother and the estrangement from his son and the daily weight of kingship and the specific heat of a British June that this year hit 40 degrees. And he is still there, still saluting, still in the uniform, still performing the ceremony. The ceremony of it is itself part of why people are talking about the royals again, because in a year that has been genuinely frightening and genuinely chaotic in the world at large, with the conflict in the Middle East, with the political turbulence that produced the resignation of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and triggered the constitutional machinery of a new appointment process in which King Charles himself plays an important role, there is something that the ritual and the pageantry and the sheer historical weight of the monarchy provides that nothing else quite provides. It is not comfort exactly. It is not reassurance in any simple sense. It is more like the feeling of touching something old and solid in a world that keeps moving faster than anyone knows how to process. The carriage goes down the mall. The soldiers stand to attention. The king salutes. These things have been happening for longer than anyone alive can remember, and they will keep happening tomorrow. That continuity in June 2026 is not nothing. It is, for a significant number of people, a great deal. But the other reason everyone is talking about the royals is the thing that has always been true about them, and that no amount of institutional messaging can change. They are genuinely, compulsively, irreducibly interesting as human beings. The Princess of Wales went to Italy in June for her first foreign trip since completing cancer treatment. She was photographed in the light of an Italian afternoon, looking healthy and rested and radiantly happy in the way that only someone who has been very unwell and has recovered can look. The images generated millions of likes within hours, not because they were politically significant or institutionally important, but because Catherine going to Italy and looking well is the kind of thing that makes people feel something. It connects to a story they have been following for 2 years with genuine personal investment. They worried about her, they hoped for her, and she went to Italy and she looked like herself again, and it made people feel good. William was photographed on what Hello magazine described as an off-duty papa moment with Princess Charlotte to mark Catherine's 44th birthday in January. He arrived at the Earthshot Prize Impact Assembly on an electric London bus and was photographed through the window, looking like a man who was entirely unbothered by traveling on public transport, which is the effect he was going for and which he achieved. He called for united responsibility for the environment while standing alongside Robert Irwin, the Australian wildlife conservationist and son of the late Steve Irwin, in a pairing that generated its own wave of warmth and coverage. Everything William does in 2026 is being watched and discussed and analyzed with the particular intensity reserved for a man who is clearly already thinking like a king, even though he has not yet been crowned as one. Camilla had her own viral moment at Royal Ascot when she was photographed being caught in an off-guard moment, fumbling with her cash. It is the kind of moment that would be completely unremarkable from anyone else, but that carries a particular delight when it involves a Queen of England, because it is so comprehensively human and so pleasingly at odds with the ceremonial grandeur of everything around her. Queen Camilla with her cash. The internet loved it. She also attended every single day of Royal Ascot 2026 alongside Charles, appearing in all-white ensembles on the first 3 days before moving to blue, dominating the fashion coverage in ways that would have been unimaginable a decade ago when she was still fighting for public acceptance. She is accepted now, more than accepted. She is, in the specific language of the moment, having a moment of her own. And running underneath all of these individual stories, connecting them and giving them a larger context that elevates each individual thread, is the question that the monarchy's tax disclosure is the most concrete expression of. What kind of institution does the British royal family need to become in order to survive? The answer is being worked out in real time, in every decision and every disclosure and every social media video and every conversation about whether cousins will meet and whether a grandfather will see his grandchildren and whether two brothers will ever be in the same room again. It is being worked out at Royal Ascot in the fashion choices of a queen and in the composure of a 10-year-old girl on a palace balcony and in the electric bus that the future king chose to ride to an environmental summit. It is being worked out in the Epstein files and in the police investigation and in the transparent tax bill that a king is releasing today for the first time in the history of the British monarchy. The reason everyone is talking about the royals again is the same reason they have always talked about them, in the good times and the bad, through the weddings and the funerals and the abdications and the divorces and the scandals and the recoveries and the moments of astonishing public pageantry and the moments of very private human pain. It is because the royal family is doing what it has always done, which is being simultaneously an institution and a family, simultaneously larger than life and unmistakably human, simultaneously the most formal organization in Britain and the one most willing to provide its audience with the raw material of genuine drama. They are arguing and recovering and showing up and falling ill and getting better and going to Italy and riding electric buses and fumbling with cash at horse racing events and sending children to school and wondering whether their grandchildren will recognize them when they walk into a room. They are, in all of that, recognizable. Even behind the gold and the ermine and the carriages and the centuries, they are people, messy and complicated and real, doing their best in a set of circumstances that nobody designed for the world we are currently living in. That is why everyone is talking about the royals again, because they are impossible to look away from, because they connect at some level that resists easy analysis to something that people find important and interesting and worth the attention. Even in June 2026, even with everything else going on, even on the hottest day ever recorded in Britain, when the changing of the guard was suspended and the king was fanned by an aide, and somewhere in a royal residence, a grandfather was counting the days until July when he might see his grandchildren for the first time in 4 years. Even then, maybe especially then,